Thank you, everybody, and welcome to CSPC 2022 pre-conference sessions. My name is Nicole Arbour, and I will be moderating this session for you. And I'd like to start, so I'm currently located in Montevideo, Uruguay, so I'm doing the session from there. And we are on the lands of the Charrúa and Guarani people. But I would also like to acknowledge that there are many other lands of many other indigenous peoples that we are all participating on whose lands we're all participating from. And I think that's important for us to remember and to keep in mind. And so welcome today. Thank you for joining us to this panel looking at building a shared language around inclusive science for global environmental change. The idea of this panel and the wonderful participants that I'm going to have introduced themselves to you shortly are going to help us to go through some really challenging conversations. I think at times we have some really challenging and hopefully really valuable conversations. I think these are all, there's so many pieces around creating shared spaces, about creating community that is going to be important as we go into the discussions, we are in the middle of the discussions around climate change, around some of the huge global challenges that we are facing today. And so I think, or I hope that this session will inspire you to think about the things that are going on around you, about the way that you engage with the people that are part of your projects, that are part of your discussions, about part of the sustainability practices that you are thinking about, and really, this is the beginning of a conversation, because as much as I would like to think that we can solve all of the world's problems in 90 minutes, I'm also aware that that's not possible. But we would like you to join the conversation from the beginning. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my colleague Fanny to drop in the chat the Miro board that we have prepared so that you can talk to us right from the beginning, and so you can share with us your thoughts as we embark on this discussion. So the idea of the Miro board is that you help us to also understand the experiences that you have had. So this isn't just, and of course there'll be opportunity for conversation and all of those other pieces, but this isn't just about, sharing the experience of the fantastic panelists that we have brought together for you, but it's also about sharing everybody's experience and about thinking about how we can do things better, how we can foster shared understandings, shared languages around common themes that are challenging for everybody to engage with. And so if you're able to join us in the Miro board, you'll see that it is set out so that you can start by anonymously putting in answers to the questions that we've put in there. We've got question 1, 2, and 3 around different challenges in the environmental change and sustainability space. And so please feel free to add your thoughts, your comments, your reflections as we go through the conversation. You can add images if you want. Really, the limit is to your imagination. And of course, as we go through this, because we're hoping that this will be a conversation, that you'll also be able to feed into the discussion that way. And so keeping that in mind and recognizing that we are in a period of change, and that change is happening to everybody, and that we're all experiencing it, but all in different ways. And that in order to engage in these discussions and for everybody to move towards sustainability together, we have to create that sense of ownership, that sense of belonging, and that sense of community. And so the idea for this conversation is to look at some of the experiences that have been had, to think about some of the tools that we have in our arsenal in order to engage in some of these difficult conversations, and to reflect on, sorry, I have to slow down. I think I'm going too fast. It's a hazard of being me. I talk at about 100 miles an hour, and I apologize. So please feel free to nudge me in the chat or wherever, when you feel that I need to go a little bit slower. So, as a very intelligent person once said, that to go deep, we have to go slow, we have to create safe spaces, and that's why discussions like these are super important. And so I don't want to talk at you anymore. I want to talk with you. And in order to do that, I'm going to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and give a very quick context of where they're coming at us from, so that we can start this discussion. And like I said, please feel free to start by contributing to the Miro board at any point, and we'll keep dropping it into the chat. So whenever you have an insightful moment or that aha moment or, oh, we should think about that more, drop it in. We would love to have you as part of the conversation. So with that, I'd like to ask if Anna Ibarra-Stewart would be willing to introduce herself first.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to all of the colleagues who are here joining us and for creating this wonderful and very unique and unfortunately rare space to be able to have these conversations, which I think are fundamental for transforming how we interact, how we work together, and how we treat the planet and each other. So my name is Ana Stewart Ibarra. I am the Scientific Director of the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, known as the IAI. I currently sit in Montevideo, Uruguay, in the southern cone of South America. As Nicole said, this is the historical land and ancestral land of the Charrúa people and Guarani people. And I myself am Ecuadorian and US citizen, descendant of Quechua people of the northern Andes, and also European settlers who came to the Americas. I see myself as both a scientist and also a public civil servant working with countries of the Americas in my current role at the IAI. My work is to support science on global change to improve decision-making across this hemisphere. And so I think this conversation is fundamental about how do we create safe spaces. And I just want to mention that some of us don't know what safe feels like. And so that's also an important starting point. Do we know what it feels like to feel safe? Do we know what it feels like to be able to bring our whole selves to the work that we do and to our relations? And so I'll stop there. And thank you, Nicole, for the opportunity to participate in this conversation.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I'm learning that I have a lot to learn about really amazing and articulate introductions, and I'll take some cues from you for next time. So that was wonderful. Thank you. I'd also like to add to what Anna has mentioned is in the context, in addition to this discussion is also about thinking about the different ways that we converse, right? The different sectors that we're coming from, the different languages we have created for ourselves in that context. Are you a scientist? Are you coming from government? Are you coming from the philanthropic sector? These also all have their languages. They have their terminology. And in order for us to come together, we need to think about how those pieces fit as part of this conversation as well. And with that, I would like to ask Jean-Marc Manguin to also introduce himself.
Bonjour, my name is Jean-Marc Mangin. I'm the President and CEO of Philanthropic Foundations Canada, the largest network of foundations in Canada, and our purpose is to strengthen Canadian philanthropy so that in all of its diversity, we can pursue a just, equitable, and sustainable world. And in the pursuit of that, we've launched just in the lead up of the last COP in Glasgow as a part of an international effort, a pledge to our members to be a climate foundation, regardless of the area where they are operating, that giving what the UN Secretary General described as that we're all on this way to climate hell, and we have our foot on the accelerator, that regardless of the sector you're operating, the arts, education, the health sector, that you must be also a climate foundation. So that you have a climate lens to your programming, a climate lens to your investment. So over 50 foundations in Canada have signed that pledge. That represents more than 10% of all foundations that have signed that international pledge so far. And there's a strong, in the Kenyan context, we've added a preamble in terms of recognizing the contribution and the knowledge base of Indigenous people in that struggle. And we are very honored to have a group of elders helping the foundation navigate that space. So, and in terms of personally, and I'm quite recent in the philanthropic world. I work in government. I work with NGOs. I was even a climate activist. I was the first executive director of the Global Call for Climate Action. And for my sins, I experienced the disaster of the Copenhagen COP 13 years ago or so. So I'm thanks for the invitation to be able to contribute, because it's quite clear to me that we need to create new ways of tackling the challenge and bring unusual allies to work together. So, thanks, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc. And, as part of this discussion, as you might have noticed, my goal was to bring as many people from different parts of that landscape together so that we can really talk about the different languages that we have come from and the different conversations that we are having.
I just realized I forgot to say where I'm calling from. So I'm calling from the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, and I'm in a small village north of Ottawa called Wakefield. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Perfect. Like I said, I'm learning from everybody. Everybody is more articulate than I am today. I apologize for that. So anyways, thank you very much, Jean-Marc, for that. And with that, I would like to ask our next fantastic panelist to join us, and that is Marlene Linda-Poitras. If you would introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your perspectives as well.
Good morning. Thank you, Nicole. Titamskat na kakyo nigano tawinaw na naskumao nuskisigaw samina migoya. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and I always give thanks to our creator for bringing us all together to have this very important discussion. My name is Marlene Poitras. I'm from the unceded traditional territory of Treaty 8 and from the Mikisew Cree First Nation. But today I'm coming to you from the territory of the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement. And so I'm really glad that we can do this virtual thing. You can, come from any part of the world, right, to have these very important discussions. And so I'm really pleased to join this discussion today. It's a very critical discussion, and our people are very connected to the land, and with the climate chaos that's occurring right now, there's a lot of issues that we need to discuss. And historically, there's the colonialism aspect that we have to overcome and discuss and build trust with one another, so that our people, the Indigenous people from everywhere, can be part of the bringing solutions to the climate chaos that's occurring right now. So I look forward to this discussion and to see how we can move forward collectively to address these very important issues.
Thank you so much, Marlene, and thank you for your willingness to join us, as the other panelists as well, because you will add such a wonderful dynamic to this conversation. And I look very much forward to having everybody as part of this conversation. And so last but certainly not least, I would like to ask our final panelist to join us and to introduce himself, Javier Gracia Garza, if you would be so kind as to give us a little bit of an aperçu into who is Javier and where are you coming to us from.
Thank you, Nicole. I will join you of being unarticulate, probably. Not like my colleagues that have done a wonderful job introducing themselves and their thinking. So first of all, I am currently joining you from Punta del Este in Uruguay, the ancestral lands of the Charrúa and the Guarani people. But what I call home is Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And to me, it has been a wonderful opportunity, and as Marlene just mentioned, to have this virtual world in where we can be pretty much anywhere in the world. But most importantly, because my experience has been that having, I think, this 1 foot, and where I live most of my life, in fact, is in Canada, but that I'm originally from Mexico, and that I work extensively with many countries and organizations here in the Latin American and Caribbean countries, and as well in my career has been with many countries around the world, where there's, I think, a lot of learning that hopefully we can acknowledge and leverage in order to advance this extremely important area that it's not just a conversation for me. I think it is the actions that will hopefully come as a result of conversations like what we are going to have today. My background, until last year, I used to work for the Canadian federal government, where I did my career as a scientist for many years, and then as a science, technology, innovation, I would say champion, administrator, or I don't know what exactly title I will have there, but I play different roles. As the Director General of several departments, science-based departments, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and my background, that is agriculture, for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. But I think one of my richest probably experiences through all of that, in very relevant to this panel, and the conference itself on the science and policies, that I play this sort of broker, if I can call it, in between the scientific world and the decision makers, the policy makers, the ones that were actually thinking of some policy innovation, and I'll come back to that. And what I'm doing right now is that I'm an advisor on issues of science and innovation for several organizations, international mostly, but as well within Canada, and for areas that are in climate change, agriculture, environment as a whole, and issues of forestry as well, which is part of what I did in my career. Extremely important, I think, the issue of language, and I think we will come back to this, but I am delighted that you invited me, Nicole, to be part of this panel, because I think from language, there are so many things that derive, that percolate, that enable us or disable us, that somehow include us or exclude us. And I think that is extremely, extremely important. So thank you again, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Javier. So as Javier mentioned, this is supposed to be, the idea here is that we're creating a conversation. And so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up our panelists with a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask everybody to sort of feed in. Feel free as we go along, not only to contribute to the Miro board that I know Fanny has put into the chat, but also to ask questions in the chat. We're definitely monitoring that. To raise your hand if you have a burning issue where you feel like you really just want to respond because someone said something, because there will hopefully be those moments. But it occurred to me that I don't know if I properly introduced myself. So my name is Nicole Arbour. I'm the Executive Director of the Belmont Forum. And the reason that this conversation is so important to me is that the research, not only because I've spent my entire career at that interface between science, society, and policy, and it's my favorite space to play, honestly. I just love to be in these different conversations and trying to create that tapestry between the different people. But also in the current role I'm in, we work towards building what we call transdisciplinary research. And that is where research is co-created and is done by and with the communities. There's scientists that are interdisciplinary, there's community members, and the idea is hopefully that we're creating societally relevant research because we're creating it with society. And we're creating it with society from the beginning so that they're part of the conversation to define the problem, they're helping us to engage in that research, and they're benefiting from that research. And in order to have the most societally relevant research, at least the perspective from which I'm looking, is to really engage everyone at an equal, equitable space from the beginning, create a shared platform, a shared language from which everybody feels that they're equally contributing or equitably contributing and equitably listened to, because I think listening is a big part of this conversation, and they feel ownership so that when the project or the product comes out at the end, it is valuable to everybody, and particularly the community to whom it is targeted. And so with that, I am going to start my series of questions with the first question, which is, what have the main challenges related to language been when talking about global environmental change and sustainability from your perspective? So I think in this context, like, think about maybe a case study or something that you know, when you're thinking about some of those challenges or the things that you have seen, what is one of the big pieces that stands out? And so I'm going to go through my panelists, and I'll get you guys to engage individually first. And so who is going to be my first victim in this context? I think I'm going to start with Jean-Marc, please.
Javier was ready to go. So a big challenge is the disconnect between scientific evidence and political action, and a sense of empowerment from individual citizens. The scale of the challenge, the urgency of the challenge, the complexity of the challenge make it such that it could be quite discouraging to engage. And I see it with Kenyan foundations, so foundations with sometimes very large assets. And they say, "Well, this is too big. We can't make any impact on such a global challenge." We pass kind of climate denial phase, but it's more about the ways of the pathways towards transition and how to be more effective. And we have to accept that there are different paths to make progress, and for me that's to empower organization and citizen to take action, and it could be very small action, but and I've seen it across projects in Canada, but also in previous role internationally, that by that level of engagement is how you create hope. Because otherwise this language of doom and gloom is very disempowering, and it's undermining our collective effort. That doesn't mean that our politicians are off the hook, but they will respond to citizen pressure, and by this web of action at both local and regional and national scale. That's how you create the web of pressure that's necessary to get the set of climate policies that meet the science, because right now there's a huge gap, and we see the disconnect with and the level of angst and anguish that leads people to throw cans of paints at paintings to try to wake us up. And I think that call for help, if we're not careful, can lead to not only mass civil disobedience, but to undermining the fabric of civil society. The challenge is complex, the challenge is urgent, and to engage people, regardless of this, where you are and your powers that you think you have, just so you can have an impact.
So I realized that I asked Jean-Marc, and then Javier had his hand, and I just saw it at the corner of my eye as I picked my first victim. So since Javier, you had your hand up, would you be willing to contribute next?
Yes, thank you. No, not a problem. With all of the virtues of virtual world, sometimes we cannot see each other easily. But no, I appreciate but Jean-Marc was ready to go. I think I felt like you were nudging me to talk about something specific here about my own experience. And so just to put a little bit of context of what I will share with you regarding, I think, the topic we were discussing. About, I would say, 4 years ago or so, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, where I was working at the time, launched an initiative that was or is actually in many ways quite innovative, revolutionary for the way we were tackling some challenges, in particular issue of climate change. That initiative that today is within the climate solutions for agriculture is the Living Labs. These living labs were established, as I said, the first set of them about 4 years ago, and these living labs, what they are trying to do is to work in using a transdisciplinary approach. And I would say creation of solutions for building resilience in agroecosystems, resilience to climate change. The approach, though, that is different for agriculture is how we do research, or that it was not really a research project per se, but it was something where we were trying to work with a very diverse group of stake and right holders to actually affect change in an accelerated way, because we do not believe necessarily that we have the luxury of transferring the results of science in the traditional way that sometimes takes a long time for producers, for farmers, or those who are, I think, both producing food, but as well guardians of the resource that we have of land and water, etc. That 25 years or 30 years that usually take for the translation, it actually wasn't something that I don't think we can afford. We need to act faster. So what we do, though, and I've been careful at using living labs. I would just give you a couple of examples of what happened with language in this situation. When we were originally talking about that, was living laboratories, and we in the word laboratory conjure immediately a building or something very specific that people had a lot more difficulty then to understand what we were trying to do in these living labs, which is more of a space that where innovation actually was happening. And at the beginning, I think with all this theory and everything, we brought specialists on this to have sessions with potential partners to be working together on this. And all this theory and all this language and about living labs, in fact, it was becoming a hindrance to actually get to do the work that we were doing. Even the word transdisciplinary, which we don't really use anymore into any of the discussions when we go into this, because it's so academic and there are so many understandings of what actually people have about that word. I'm sure that even if you ask this panel, we will have different sort of definitions of what it is. But it's not that we have a diversity of understanding. It is the issue that when we actually think about that and use words, this, as I said before, enables or disables people, or empowers them or disempower them. And one thing I can tell you, one very specific example, when we were using the words user-centric, which is one of the tenets of a living lab, using centric versus using user-driven. The user-driven type of approach was perceived as, by some of our scientists in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, as I need to wait until they tell me what they want to do. And the whole concept of co-creation was a very different sort of process. On the opposite side, and I had the opportunity and honor to actually lead a group of G20 organizations that from the G20 countries to talk about this living laboratory. And at every moment, everybody would say, "Oh, we're already doing that. We are doing that." So, but the problem with that is that first of all, it was not really that we were doing that. We were doing elements perhaps of that, but it was not something that we were doing with a very clear purpose or a very clear, I would say, methodology on advancing something of this engagement. We all consult. Every research organization consult the users. But I think, to quote Henry Ford, I think if they would have been asked what we needed, yes, at the time, I think he said something like, we will need faster horses. It was not an automobile, right? Or whatever implications it has that. But so I think one thing is to consult and to get involved with the user. Another thing is actually to co-create where everybody, absolutely everybody, is bringing into. I think this advancement of knowledge generation and solution-driven type of things. I think the richness of what we are bringing in there. I would just give you some examples of why language is extremely critical and how careful we should be. Perfection shouldn't be paralyzing us, but I will say, if we know something, if we are already aware of those things, we should check and understand what the people are listening in these situations. I'll leave it at that as some very specific example.
Thank you, Javier. That's a wonderful series of examples, and you really hit the nail on the head in the context of the use of the word transdisciplinary, because we use the word transdisciplinary. It is it is an academic term, and in the context I use it in, and often I forget that there's so different words that we use when we're thinking about this co-creation, this co-development process, and that bringing those into that conversation is super important as well. And that's also why having these conversations and pulling apart what we don't know is also key. Marlene, I was wondering if you would be able to sort of contribute to some of the challenges that you have been part of, witnessed, experienced in this particular context. Oh, you're muted still.
Thank you, Nicole. My apologies. Worldwide, we have millions of Indigenous people with a whole bunch of different languages, but the reality is, in our perspective, our elders, our traditional knowledge keepers, they're our scientists, because the connection, the land is the basis to our spirituality. Everything that we do, like when they go out and go hunting, there's prayer and there's different aspects of doing things, and so we've always been misunderstood, and there has to be inclusion. We have to be included at the outset, whether it's in policy development, my question is, you have COP27 that's occurring right now. Where are the Indigenous people in terms of providing some guidance to those discussions that are occurring? So to me, Indigenous people everywhere have been marginalized for a long time. And, while this climate chaos is occurring at the moment, it impacts Indigenous people directly because of the poverty that we have, and, the places that we've been displaced to in this world where climate change has a direct impact. So, we have the expertise within our communities to provide some input in terms of how do we address climate change. And then, my recommendation to you is that, when you have Indigenous inclusion, it's just not to have one person that represents everybody, because there's all different ways that we do things, and so I realize that's a challenge, but and you have to recognize that even virtually, there are some places that don't have the ability to join any of these discussions virtually, because of where they're at, and the poverty. Even I was involved a few years ago in the UN discussions, and the inclusion of Indigenous people, the financing was a big discussion, because a lot of our people cannot, just pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to go and attend, an event like in Egypt from wherever. I mean, those things take a lot of money, and so those are some of the factors that prevent us from being involved. But then that political will has to be there. It has to be there, and you have to build that trust. Trust is a huge issue that we haven't addressed. That's the elephant in the room, because our people have been, oppressed for so long. So when we're involved in these discussions, we have to see our comments or our recommendations as part of these policy development, as part of these big research policy proposals that come out. So to me, that's very important aspect. And so language is definitely a huge issue, but then if we come together, then we can start to have those discussions on how we mitigate those issues, and so that we can work together and come together in a good way to put those solutions on the table and address the climate change issues that we're currently involved in. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. And Anna, and not last, but definitely not least, just on this question, I'm really worried that there's so many good things to be said here, and just 90 minutes. Please, Anna.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'll be concise. My comments are perhaps the most obvious way of framing language, but language in terms of what is considered the dominant or the normal language. So until we stop considering English as the norm, especially in science, we won't be able to change the whole discussion around sustainability and inclusive science. And so this is a discussion we have all the time about, you'll hear comments, oh, English is the language of science. And that's not true. There are people all over the world doing science in different languages. And as soon as you say that, those people are excluded. And this is a huge number of people. And so this is a major, major issue. How do we change the publications, the reports, the grant funding structures, what languages we can submit grants for funding, the conferences? We need to create mechanisms to include the voices of people who speak other languages, and even many scientists I know speak, who are not have English as their first language. They speak English, and yet they have told me directly, I prefer to speak in my first language, and I am able to express myself in a more authentic and a deeper way. And so if we want to create safe spaces, it's really hard to share in a safe way if you're not speaking in the language that you feel comfortable in. And so this is, again, there are lots of ways we can go about this, but this is, I think, a daily fight in my work. And we are making progress, but there's a lot more that we can do. Because I'll give you one simple example. I was a part of the IPCC Working Group 2 on adaptation. The reports were published this last year. We worked on the chapter for Central and South America, reviewing all of the evidence. And the reports are now in English. And so how does that help the governments of the region in Central and South America to adapt to climate change? We need to translate these documents, not only translate them to other languages like Spanish or Portuguese, which are the dominant languages used by governments in Latin America, but also make the language accessible to different audiences, like our other colleagues have already mentioned. And so this can't be an afterthought. This has to be part of the initial conception of these different initiatives. Thanks, Nicole.
Yep, and these are some things that, having worked in an international space now for the bulk of my career, and especially like in that boundary spanning kind of way, you really realize, because, while what you say is absolutely spot on in terms of, language is, we often hear language is English is the language of science, which is, as you say, excludes a huge number of people. But if we're trying to create those safe spaces, you're not only trying to bring science in, right? We're here having this discussion because we're trying to bring society in, and society doesn't speak in English always. Like, there's members of my own family who don't speak in English. So all of these conversations, if we're trying to bring them in, then actually it has to be, in my family, in French. And in other families, it's going to be in a different language, perhaps. And so language at sort of as a very specific thing does play a big role in this. And if you think about different governments in different parts of the world, to be a political leader, you speak the language of your people. You don't necessarily speak English, and that's why the UN has so much interpretation, which is wonderful. I just wish the world was as inclusive as I would like it to be, but the world, according to Nicole, is not here yet. We're still working on that. So the next question that I would like us to sort of start thinking about are really more about sort of creating those safe spaces. So, what are there are some foundations. We touched on this a little bit in the discussion, and what I'd like to ask you is, what, as a sort of language as a thing in itself, what are the other sort of foundational challenges that we're facing in this context? And where have you seen, I'd like to be able to think of some really good positive examples but we can look at the hard examples too, because like I said, this is about having hard conversations, not only about having easy conversations. It's good to be able to see, those spots of light where something works super well and you can say, yes, finally, this is awesome. But there's also, skeletons that we should shake out of the closets every once in a while so we can have some of these complicated discussions. So what are some of the foundational challenges that we need to think about when we're creating these safe spaces, and that you have thought about in your variety of institutions and places that are very different one from the other? So you'll probably have, while you'll have experienced overlap in some of those foundational challenges, I'm sure you will probably also have experienced them from very different places. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands who wants to go first, and hopefully this time I will catch. Oh, look at that. There goes Jean-Marc. He's willing. All right, go.
I'm going to challenge the question. I think that we don't have to create safe spaces. We have to create brave spaces. And to create brave spaces to do the kind of action that's required, we need what Marlene put a finger on, the trust. That without trust, we'll not be able to create these brave spaces. And how do you create trust? But you have to create space where you recognize the power imbalance, and we come from different places, and we bring different elements to the table, and they're all valuable in their own way. And I'll give you a specific example. Is that one of our members in Canada, the Suncor Foundation, one of the largest energy company in the country, and they're working with First Nation communities, mostly in Alberta, but also elsewhere. And you could imagine that some of these communities said, well, this big foundation's coming in on behalf of this big company. This is just effort to pay us off and to do some greenwashing. And the foundation had to really demonstrate that was not the case, that they were there to learn as much as to support. And to really understand what the priorities of communities were and shape the programming accordingly, and also bring these indigenous voices within the corporate side of the company, so that transmission of knowledge. And over time is creating some very exciting new partnership, new webs of relationship. But it has to come from a level, it has to be authentic. And you have to, from a philanthropist side, to bring a great dose of humility to the conversation, to be able to create that brave space. Otherwise, people will smell if it's green. They'll know right away if it's greenwashing or that they're being used. They're no fools, and they'll pull out. So that's notion of bringing people that you'd not expect to be able to collaborate on specific issues. Doesn't mean they agree on everything, but they are elements that are very concrete, that does address elements of the global challenge. And you can say, well, Suncor is still in the oil fan and is a big player there, But in that transition to a low carbon economy, what's the most effective pathways? And having these kinds of conversation and challenging conversation, but that you create space for conversation that would not occur otherwise, and hopefully it does shape some of these larger decisions. So concept of brave spaces and the need for trust building.
Yeah, I would argue that trust is hard to create outside of a safe space, but I think you also need to be brave for sure. And I see that Javier has his, well, at least I think I saw his hand go up. But I just want to also point out that as the conversation's been going on, Anna has stuck in some cool references into the chat. So if you haven't followed the chat, do feel free to go in and take a look at those. And there's also the link to the Miro board. So if you want to contribute to that and talk about some of the challenges that you've seen, because like I said, the people who are my panelists here and who have had some fantastic experiences have their experiences, but I suspect that those of you in the audience have had also experiences that will contribute to this conversation. So please, Javier, the floor is yours.
Yeah, yes, and I hope that actually people will have the opportunity and that we will have an opportunity to react to some of the thoughts that they are putting in there. But I want to echo a little bit, I think, what Jean-Marc mentioned, because I think, Marlene, when you talk about trust, it hit immediately. My experience in working on this specific initiative that I share with you, but throughout, I think, my career before I retired from the federal government, to me, the issue of trust is critical. And I agree with you, Nicole, that I think it has to be in those safe spaces. We have to be brave. We have to be compassionate. We have to be respectful. But I think those are the kinds of things that in time, I think I agree, Jean-Marc, it will bring authenticity when we are brave, and hopefully, obviously, must be respectful and compassionate about the fact that we are very imperfect. I think we're trying our best. But I think if we build that trust and then the brave conversations are had within an environment where we are trusting that we are collectively trying to achieve something, to me, it will certainly accelerate the way that we actually can be work together towards the solutions that we are looking for, etc. I think. Anna mentioned the issue of English versus, in the Latin American context, the Spanish and Portuguese. And I think how that establishes, in so many different ways, an advantage perceived, I think, in some ways, if the ones who are actually bringing the help, the this, the that, is all an English world or a world that is not actually the world that is, and that you are just sort of the receptor of those kinds of things. I think if there was trust, I think these conversations could advance a lot more. I'm going to stop there because I think I'm just reiterating, I think, what Marlene said, that trust is at the core of my own experience after many years of working in the federal government. When we have that, we can advance a lot in the way that we interact with each other and finding the solutions for these critical issues that we are faced now with.
Nicole, I'm going to jump in, and Marlene actually already set the stage for this, but she talked about our colonial legacies. And I think this is fundamental, and understanding, recognizing, naming, and owning all of our parts of that. We each have different pieces that we've lived, but until we do that, we will continue to perpetuate these unconscious biases that shape how we interact. When we sit down at the table and we look around the room and we see different faces, we automatically make assumptions about who is legitimate, who is, who has better opinions and who has less legitimate opinions. We all do that. But this requires really a lot of very conscious thought and transformation and sort of changing of our own internal awareness. And through conversations like the one we're having today, that happens. But this is a major undertaking. And I still think that the colonial legacy is largely unspoken about in an explicit way. And so hand in hand, there's also a lack of targeted research and policy action to address this. In the work that I do in the area of climate adaptation, my colleagues have shown through systematic reviews that there are so few studies actually looking at underlying vulnerabilities, underlying, whether it's through the research to identify communities that are vulnerable, but also identifying actions and policies and interventions to reduce vulnerability. It's not happening. And so nothing will change if we just come up with fancy early warning systems, which is the area I work in, but we're not talking about why communities in the urban periphery and slums in Latin America are exposed every year to severe flooding. This is not something new. This is something that has been lived for many years. The work that I did, and my close friends and colleagues know this. They don't need another model to be able to tell them that they are vulnerable, exposed, and their health is harmed every year by climate change. And so the flip side of this, which probably gets into, I know what we're going to talk about next, Nicole, are these decolonial processes, or this idea of decolonization. And that's kind of a technical word, but for thinking about how we reshape and kind of change our internal chips. And maybe I want to stop here, and I would love to hear what Marlene has to say about this. But I know that there are many countries in Latin America that are starting to think about this. In Bolivia, for example, there is a ministry of decolonization and many exciting initiatives in the region, and many scholars also thinking about how we can bring decolonial practices to transform how we engage with each other and whose voices are valued in these discussions.
Marlene?
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole, and all the speakers, for your great comments. And like Anna said, one of the first things that we have to do is move beyond colonialism, that we've experienced for, hundreds of years. And one of the issues that we were having some discussions around in Canada was systemic racism, and how do we deal with that? And the systemic racism primarily that I was involved had to do with health, but I think it applies everywhere in terms of the judiciary system, and even in terms of climate change, and how we're able to provide some input into that process. But in terms of building trust, we have to change that narrative. We have to have our people at the table, and we have a lot of, like I said, a lot of experts. We even have a lot of educated people that are involved in policy development, and at our community level. So there has to be ways where those discussions can occur, and I know it's a huge menu that we have to look at, but I think that if we come together and start building that trust and put our minds together, I think that we can accomplish a lot. You have to recognize that our input is significant, and that it can be part of the solution. So I cannot stress that enough, that inclusion of our youth. Last few years you had our youth that were protesting worldwide, because this is their future, that they're concerned about. And so it's it's important to look at all aspects of it, and start putting things in place. Like I know, like I said, COP26, they had some targets that were in place to ensure that we don't reach 1.5, and we're dangerously close to a place of no return, and so some of the communities are our countries are not serious enough about doing their due diligence in terms of putting these policies. And I'm really happy to hear that there's some areas like in Latin America that are doing some initiatives to address these issues. And we can learn from one another. There's a lot of places that are more advanced in terms of taking these issues and addressing them head on. And I think it's exciting times right now. I know climate is in chaos, but I really believe that if we came together and had those discussions in a good way, that we can save the planet. We can save and live harmoniously to ensure that our children and their children continue to enjoy Mother Earth like we all have. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. And so this is the next question that I would like to go. But like I said, I also wanted to encourage any questions, because if those of you who are in our audience right now have some thoughts that they'd like to contribute, we can always pull questions from there. Of course, I have tons of questions, so I could keep my panelists occupied all day. Not that I have all day, but if you have burning questions, please do drop them into the chat. And we will bring those ones up as well. But, we are having, in the context of setting up this panel, I was also thinking about, how can we come together? What are the opportunities to solve some of these challenges? And I think, from where I sit, some of my challenges are really, how do I get all of the different parties that I need to come into those safe spaces, right? To be brave, to take the time to listen to the other parties, to help create to co-create language, so that when we're building these discussions, when we're coming together, we're all coming together with a shared understanding of the direction of the problems that we're trying to solve, but also the direction we're trying to travel in, and that we're going towards it hand in hand and together. And so then I guess so for me, the question is are you seeing opportunities for achieving some of these shared languages and understanding at the Science Society Policy Interface? Are there things that you have seen that you're working on that you would like to give us an aperçu of, that you might be willing to share with the community around what are the pieces of this conversation that you see as opportunities? I see Anna nodding away, so I'm wondering if that means she might want to tackle this question first.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. And I'll keep my comments pretty brief, because I want to hear from their other participants. But just to mention that at the IAI, our member states have been really innovative and progressive in requesting and pushing forward a new policy on gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this policy was adopted at our Conference of the Parties this last June. I'll put a link in the chat. And we are so excited to be able to work on the implementation of this. And when we talk about gender equity, diversity, inclusion, we're talking about participation in the programs that we do. So participation in research and capacity building, in the staff composition, having those different voices at the table, but also in the research itself, that the evidence that's generated, that there's evidence around these issues, so that the investigators and the teams are looking to understand how, for example, climate change has a differential impact on different groups. And what are mechanisms and best practices to change those structures of oppression like we've been talking about. So again, this is for us a very exciting move, and we are mainstreaming these considerations in all of the work that we do across the research and capacity building programs at our organization. So again, I'll share that link in the chat here.
All right, who wants to tackle this one next? Javier, your mic is on, so I'm going to go. Oh, wait, Marlene has her hand up. There you go.
Start with the ladies first on this one. Well, I think coming together is key, and and I know from the experience that we've had, like here in Canada, when we talk about co-creation, co-development, a policy or anything like that, with government or with anyone, we have to see our input from the beginning, at the outset, until to the point where the policy is developed. Like, we have input a lot of times, and then the government will take it, and because of cabinet parliamentary privilege or whatever, then it becomes secret, and then at the end, we see a document where our input is minimalized, and so I think that when we're involved at that aspect in terms of policy development, we have to see our input and our recommendations, included in that policy. And to me, that's one way that you begin to build trust, because if it's changed to what our expectations were at the ground level, you have people that are starting to protest, and they're upset because of thinking that we were involved in the end part of developing that policy, when a lot of times that we're not. So to me, building trust is also that inclusion, but right to the very end, where we can see our input in the policies that are being rolled out. So thank you.
So I don't know if I should attack Javier because his mic is over, but I'll open. But before I do that, I also just wanted to draw people's attention to the Miro board, because there's some activity in there. There's lots of drawings, there's some notes, or there's a few drawings. So do please feel free to wander over to the Miro board and make your contribution. And don't forget to leave any questions that you might have in the chat. Go ahead, Javier, sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna go in. I'm using a little phone in a room in a hotel or something, so that's the reason why I'm not even touching the unmute or mute or anything. So that's the reason why it's always, it's not because I'm ready to jump in and start talking. But I just want to say, I think both interventions, Anna and Marlene's, really, really important. And I think the issue of inclusion, I think in this plurality of voices, is huge, is important. It's an important thing, a principle I think that we should be following. But in addition, I think what Marlene points out is important. It's not, and again, the issue of those who in my experience here, oh yeah, I consulted, I just went and heard voices, and I heard all sorts of voices, but then I never actually became accountable for it. And I think to some extent what Marlene is saying, so how then the final report didn't even reflect anything of, yes, I heard everybody and I ignored everybody. So that's not necessarily what the point is here. So I don't want to actually comment necessarily on that. I just wanted to mention the one thing in the world of science that sometimes my own, I think, experience and in Canada is something that I definitely see as a lacking or as an opportunity to actually strengthen it over time, and the sooner the better, is when we talk about whether it's climate change or many other things, and we talk of technological advances and the research and the science that is done, we're trying to find technical or technological solutions to problems where I think originally social was the actual problem. That created, I think, our attitude of certain things towards certain things, towards approaching, has created a lot of problems. So I think what an example mentioned about the peri-urban areas, etc. I think to me, it's one of the things where we need to address the social underlines, the social foundations of what are actually the issues that need to be tackled. And that is where an opportunity that I see us working collectively in a more, I would say, pluralistic way, where we are bringing a lot of different voices, disciplines of science, the social element, the social sciences, and not only economics associated to that, but actually the underlying factors that makes us decide things, and that includes the colonialist thinking, the colonized, I think, thinking. All of that is important that we consider it as part of the dialogue in order for us to build something more solid for the future.
Javier, the risks that you take when you leave your microphone off, or on, I mean. Jean-Marc, please.
So I would agree with my fellow panelists. I mean, the challenge is less the technology and the findings of our science, and translate that to a wider audience and commercialize them. Is the challenge is the social science, humanities, the people, and recognizing the social constructs that we've built ourselves with the economy and the power relationship that we have, and naming the challenge of structural racism and colonialism, and decolonizing our society and our world. Couple of example where I think there's room for optimism is that I was at a forum last week in Ottawa on sustainable finance, that brought leaders from the indigenous leaders, venture capitalists, the banks, many NGOs, people working in social housing, deploying capital to address challenges as complex as diabetes in northern Manitoba, and there was a lot of excitement in the room, and to demonstrate government care about it. The Prime Minister showed up, several cabinet ministers, but there was a participant at the end that said, "Well, so what? That amounts to a few $100 million of announcement, and look at the scale of our challenges." And you have to admit the person is right, but I like to go back to when my experience in Copenhagen, which was a disaster. And we had there's a group of activists. It was a cold winter day, wet day in Copenhagen, and we're outside shivering and feeling sorry for ourselves. And Desmond Tutu comes out, late Desmond Tutu, and harangued us, saying, you have a duty to hope. You cannot never give up, and you don't know what the outcomes of the human struggles are going to be, and led with some very powerful examples from the South African struggle, and that same group of activists were, I think, instrumental to lead to the Paris Agreement a few years later. I'm concerned about this like the fact that we have much more polarized society, that the level of trust is going down across the board, and that the ties that bind us are weakening, and we can't afford to do that. So they and to go back to concrete action, and that's how you build. That's how you build trust, and learn from failures as they come along, and work at it harder. We have no choice but to work at it harder in terms of shaping a new language and shaping action that actually will make a difference to address the climate crisis. That was heavy.
That was heavy.
I just
Please.
Add to what Jean-Marc said. I think we as humans have a duty and a responsibility to construct our vision of the future. And that's through purposeful action. That's not something that will just happen on its own. And so doing that and finding ways to do it together, that is a responsibility that we have. If we want to sustain life on this planet, life in a good way, life that's healthy, and not just human life, but all of our other relations on this planet. And so we need to do this in a serious, concerted way to construct those visions and to ensure that the voices who need to be heard are heard in the construction of the vision of the future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. I'm very cognizant that I am down to 3 minutes for this panel, and I definitely do not want to forget to thank my wonderful panelists for joining us in this, what I hope is one of many discussions. So not only would I encourage those of you here to continue this conversation, have the hard conversation, ask the difficult questions, bring all of the skeletons out of the closet, because that is how we're going to create these relationships, these trusted spaces, these safe places for everybody to come in. I know that there's also a session rating or thing that is going to happen, and it's going to be dropped into, there you go, dropped into the polls section. So please rate this session. Tell us how much fun you had hanging out with us. I'm hoping that everyone is going to tell us how outstanding it is. But if you actually feel otherwise, please also tell us, because that means next time I plan a session, I will have something to work towards. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Anna, Javier, Marlene, Jean-Marc, who should all be putting outstanding right now as their session outputs. And all the audience who has contributed through the Miro board, to Fanny, who's been in the background, also watching and learning and contributing. And please have these conversations in your spaces too. Foster them. They need to be had. And that's my advice to everybody out there who's participating in and listening to us today, is please have more of these conversations, make people uncomfortable, push them out of their comfort zone. And hi, Gordon. I was so happy to see you. I have so many faces in the audience that I wish I had more time to hang out with, but we will find those moments. So thank you guys for coming, and we look forward to our next opportunity. And if you would like to join me in giving our fan panels list a round of virtual applause through your reactions, please do so.